Once upon a time, in a quiet village at the edge of a vast forest, there lived a sweet young girl known to all as Little Red Riding Hood. She was called this because of the beautiful red cloak and hood her grandmother had made for her. One sunny morning, her mother called her into the kitchen with a basket filled with bread, cakes, and a bottle of wine. "Take this to your grandmother, dear," her mother said. "She's not feeling well and could use some cheering up. Remember, don't stray from the path and don't talk to strangers." Little Red Riding Hood promised to obey her mother and set off through the forest. The birds sang sweetly as she walked, and the sunlight filtered through the trees, making the path dappled with light and shadow. As she wandered along, she met a sly wolf who was curious about where she was going. The wolf, hiding his true intentions behind a friendly smile, asked her, "Where are you going, little girl?" Little Red Riding Hood, remembering her mother's advice but not sensing any danger, replied, "I'm going to visit my grandmother. She lives in a cottage at the end of this path." The wolf, plotting his wicked plan, said, "What a lovely idea! But look at these beautiful flowers, dear. Why don't you gather some for your grandmother? I'm sure they would cheer her up." Forgetting her mother's warning, Little Red Riding Hood strayed from the path to pick flowers. Meanwhile, the cunning wolf hurried straight to the grandmother's cottage. When he arrived, he knocked on the door. "Who is it?" called the grandmother from her bed. "Little Red Riding Hood," the wolf replied, disguising his voice. "I've brought you some treats to help you feel better." The trusting grandmother invited him in, and the wolf, revealing his true nature, quickly gobbled her up. He then put on her nightgown and cap and settled into bed, waiting for Little Red Riding Hood. A while later, Little Red Riding Hood arrived at the cottage, her arms full of flowers. She knocked on the door. "Who is it?" the wolf called out, trying to sound like her grandmother. "It's me, Little Red Riding Hood," she replied. "I've brought you some bread, cakes, and wine." "Come in, dear," the wolf said. Little Red Riding Hood entered and went to her grandmother's bedside. The wolf, covered up to his chin, looked quite odd. Little Red Riding Hood was puzzled. "Grandmother, what big eyes you have!" she exclaimed. "All the better to see you with, my dear," the wolf replied. "Grandmother, what big ears you have!" "All the better to hear you with, my dear," the wolf answered. "Grandmother, what big teeth you have!" "All the better to eat you with!" the wolf roared, leaping out of bed. Just as the wolf was about to pounce on Little Red Riding Hood, a woodsman, who had been passing by, heard her screams and rushed into the cottage. With a mighty blow of his axe, he defeated the wolf and saved Little Red Riding Hood. Grateful and relieved, Little Red Riding Hood and her grandmother thanked the brave woodsman. They decided to always keep the door locked and be wary of strangers. Little Red Riding Hood learned a valuable lesson that day. Always listen to your parents and stay on the safe path. And so, Little Red Riding